Hello and welcome to another episode of the After the Amen podcast. I'm Miles Hester here with Benjamin Lee, ready to talk about another sermon this week. Ben preached a sermon called Reasons Not to Get Married. Now we're going to hear what Ben has to say about reasons not to get married, some reasons to get married. But before we continue any further, Ben, I think you have an update about our upload schedule.
I do. Good to see you, Miles. So the big update is podcast moving forward, starting today, which is going to be Monday when you hear this. The podcast will be published each Monday morning. So if you're driving to work, cleaning the house, getting the kids ready, the podcast will be ready for you on Monday mornings now. So take a look at that. Take a look for that. Typically, we've been publishing on Tuesdays. Now we're moving to Mondays. So that's the big update. Now, the second thing is the sermon. So I've done 2 sermons this year. Our elders have they did a special breakout class on Sunday nights earlier this year. I believe that was February or March, Miles. So we've had a lot of discussion about marriage, which I think is very important. Sometimes we can struggle in our marriages. There are young people who are thinking about marriage, or maybe 5-10 years down the road, it's coming to mind. So marriage is something that's very important. My title, Reasons Not to Get Married, is one that I really haven't spent a lot of time talking about. I think I've sprinkled some of these thoughts throughout other sermons throughout the years, but I wanted to be pretty clear about, there are some reasons that are not always the best about a person saying, I'm going to get married. In fact, someone was telling me after services that a young person they know at their church had posted on, I don't know, Facebook or Instagram, that they're now married. And he was like, wait, you're married? She's like in her early 20s. And he's like, is that true? And she's like, yeah. And her boyfriend was going through something very dramatic, or someone was like near death. And so he was kind of in his feelings, life is short, and, let's just go ahead and get married now. So they're married. And he was even thinking, well, man, that's kind of fast, where emotions are powerful. Emotions can drive us to do a lot of things. Emotions can sometimes cloud our vision. So we need to be wise with why we're getting married. So I talked about reasons, going after money. People have done that before. Sometimes people do that just to become a citizen of a particular nation. I'm going to marry you. And sometimes people go after the money. People feel like, I'm desperate. I'm getting older. Am I ever going to have kids? Does anyone think I'm pretty or handsome? And so a person who gives them an ounce of attention, that's who they cling to. So there's a variety of reasons that are not always the best. Not when you think about marriage in the eyes of God and the Christian perspective of a joining between a man and a woman, a clinging, a union, a one flesh type relationship. So I wanted to really warn and just help people kind of think about some things. I think it's even important for parents. Sometimes parents may feel a little bit embarrassed or pressured. Why aren't your kids married yet? What's going on with that? Is it, what's happening here? There's a variety of reasons why a person may be single, why they may delay getting married, whatever the case may be. So we looked at some of those reasons, and I mentioned it in the sermon, and someone else mentioned, I'm glad you added that part at the end. Otherwise, it would have been a very depressing sermon about only these reasons not to get married. There are plenty of excellent reasons to get married. Hopefully, we love the person. We're physically attractive to the person. Arranged marriages have been a part of our society for a very long time. There could be some cases where a person was not attractive, but as you age with a person, as you get older with a person and have experiences with them and grow together, they do become attractive in a different kind of way, right? And so physical attraction is not always going to be around, but certainly that's a part of it. Wanting to have a companion in this life and wanting to help someone go to heaven, that's something important as well. So we talked about reasons not to get married, reasons to get married, reasons to stay married. So I think marriage is something we should talk about often. It's not often the case that some of us are going to be led away by certain things. We do have to teach the whole counsel of God. But if you look around, not every couple, I want to be careful with overstatements, not every couple, not every church but marriage is a challenge. It takes a lot of work. And I was talking to a younger couple there. They've been married about a year. And I said, hey, how'd you guys do it before you got married with respect to counseling? And they said, we talked to someone that is older, wiser, husband and wife. So the young woman talked to the wife, the young man talked to the husband. He's like an older version of me. He's 65, but he's like an older version of me. And I said, well, have you guys talked to anyone else since you've gotten married? And they said, huh. And I love their answer because they said, you know what? We still talk to that couple. And I was like, oh, that's really good. That's really good. Where there's like this continuation. I think that's something important where, and I mentioned it in the sermon, sometimes we can front load everything with the dress, with the tux, with the ring, with the ceremony, with the honeymoon, the photo albums, the videographer, all these things. Perfect. No problem. Enjoy all of that. And also remember, what happens after that 30-minute ceremony, or that week or 2 week long honeymoon. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and you and I have talked about things. I've shared things, and there's challenges. There's highways and the byways, and there's challenges in a marriage, and so that's it's something good for us to talk about on a regular basis.
You're exactly right. And I think that's the thing when you talking to married people, or I'm sure we have situations. I mean, I know several of my friends in college or people I knew of in college where it seemed very fast, or, you didn't think they knew each other very well, or you thought something weird might be going on, or different things like that. And like you said, we put so much thought into marriage, but it does seem like a lot of times a lot of that thought goes into kind of um, the things you're excited about being married. It kind of come to the front, and then it's almost like you don't realize that things are going to be difficult ever, or things are going to be stress, or you're going to have to work through some things, or whatever the case may be. You never know what life is going to throw your way, so to speak, after that ceremony, and so it can be really easy to not prepare for the covenant of marriage, right? When you're just so focused on the wedding or the engagement or the honeymoon phase and things like that. So maybe just for the last couple of minutes, we can focus on some good reasons to get married, and of course, reasons to stay married. I know, obviously, one thing that we've talked about and you've talked about in your past sermons about marriage is, obviously, if you're going, a reason to get married would be to have a scriptural right to marriage. A very good reason not to get married is if you don't have a scriptural right to be married, of course. But often, people talk about from the very beginning in Genesis chapter 2, it's not good for man to be alone, right? So I guess my question to you would be, with finding this balance of, we talked about desperation of not just getting married for the sake of getting married, but it's not good for man to be alone. Marriage is a good thing. I know one thing you talked about in both the reasons not to get married and the reasons to get married section was the sexual relationship, right? You shouldn't just get married out of lust, so to speak, but obviously sex is something that God created to be good and to be enjoyed between a husband and a wife. So with some of these things where in a certain way it can be bad, but within marriage it really is a good thing, companionship is a good thing, all these different things, how would you, to a young person, a single person who's looking for a mate, thinking about getting married, how would you tell them to strike that balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's always important going back to Genesis chapter 2. Full disclosure, I don't have a set prescription about how long a person should date before they get married. So much of that is subjective. A lot of that is spiritual discernment and wisdom, that I think all of us are looking for, if we're thinking about marriage. So I talked to someone else and they said, yeah, I would like to get married one day. So it's already on their mind. So if someone is already thinking about marriage, I think preparing themselves for that person, when they find them. I don't believe in the idea of having a soulmate in the sense of there's just that one perfect person who's out there, and you may wait till you're 60 to find that person, or maybe you find them at 20. But to answer your question, Miles, I would say, yeah, we all have these lust desires that God has made for us, for a man with a woman and a woman for a man, and how those things can be satisfied. So I think there's a balance of maturity, of wisdom. I use the example of Samson, go get me that woman, she looks good to me. He's not thinking probably about Genesis chapter 2. I don't think he's
Right.
thinking about that at all.
Right.
He's not thinking about that at all. She's hot. She's got a great body. I want her. That's what he's thinking about, to the point even with Delilah. She's setting him up numerous times, and yet he keeps going back to her. So there's pride, there's ego there. So if I'm talking to a young person, one, are you actually ready for marriage? I think it's good for a young man to think about, if I get married, can I actually support this woman? And I've heard stories of couples who have been flat broke, and that's a decision they have to make. But I've also heard of people, they've planned for this, and they have some kind of plan, whether it's, okay, we're going to stay with our parents for a year and save up. There's wisdom there. There's some kind of plan, right? But a man having some kind of plan, having some kind of vision that he can have for his family about, this is the path that we're going to take. Just kind of, hey, we'll figure it out on the fly. That feels like one of the rom-com movies, or whatever they call them, that it's just a romantic movie. It's just a spur in the moment. Hey, we'll figure everything else out. I'm sure that there are people out there who have done exactly that, and they've been married for 50 years and everything has worked out great. I guess I'm talking about more of the averages and, setting yourself up for that. So it could mean for a young woman that, maybe she wants to travel more. Maybe both people want to get done with their education. Maybe they're still trying to figure themselves out. The example I used was with a new convert. If she would have waited a year, she may have become more mature and said, well, no, this guy doesn't look anything like what a godly man should look like. So I'm kind of answering your question in different bits and pieces. Sex is to be enjoyed. God knows that he has given us a sex drive. So there's wisdom with that. And in Song of Solomon, I believe, talks about that too, right? Don't arouse the love until the right time, right? So there's a right time, and with that person. I would also just say, if two young people make that decision, just make sure they understand the full scope of marriage. Understand what you're getting into, so there's no surprises 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later. And if you understand that and are willing to do what God says, then okay. But I do think sometimes people can rush into it. I got married when I was 24. Nikki and I were both 24. I had a full-time job, and looking back, I was still immature in a lot of ways, but I did feel like I was mature, and I had thought about it. And there's a lot of things to really think about. Two young people could have tons of, maybe hundreds of thousands of school loan debts. Okay, if you say I do, you're inheriting her debt, and she's inheriting your debt. Just be aware of that. If you get married, you got 100,000, 200,000, whatever, 75,000, 50, that's still a lot. Just so you know, you can enjoy the sex and those bills that will be coming through the mail. That's part of it as well. So you have to look at the whole thing. You got to look at the family. The biggest thing is the spiritual component. And if you're not thinking about that, so, to answer your question, if I'm saying anything, I'm saying there has to be wisdom. There has to be insight. There has to be looking at the broad picture and not just always going off of emotions and, hey, let's just go ahead and do this and we'll figure everything else out.
Yeah, I think
And I will say, and I'll say this too. I know you're going to say something. Even with that, and if I preach this again somewhere else, I'll emphasize this. It's still not a guarantee. Even if you date for 2 or 3 years, You're going to be married to 6 or 7 people throughout that marriage, not 6 or 7 different people. I'm not talking about divorce, but how old are you? 23?
25,
25. How old's your wife?
26.
So 10 years from now, you two are going to be different in some shape or form.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying your likes, your interests, your body, your attitude, your mindset, your experience, that's a whole decade. And so as we think about marriage long term, I'm not saying that any of this is a guarantee,
Right.
because everybody has free will, and it's you have to walk by faith. It's
Right.
not like some guarantee if I marry a Christian, everything's going to work out okay. Hopefully it does, and many times it does. So let me be careful with that too. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily just, hey, we got it all figured out, we're done. No,
Right.
there still has to be work that's put into it.
Right. I think you're exactly right. Even we've only been married. Claire and I just celebrated our 3rd anniversary, and 3 years is not. I know is not a very long time when it comes to marriage. There's a lot of people who have been married a lot longer than that. But, even in a relatively short 3 years, changes have happened, and even things that were outside of either one of our control. And so, viewing it as I think really what it goes back to is like one of the examples you use in your sermon is the triangle, right? Many people have probably heard this where, you have the triangle where there's a husband and a wife, and then God is at the top in the middle. And as they both grow closer to God, they both grow closer to each other. And I think when you view marriage that way, both as you're preparing for it, you're preparing for a covenant relationship where God is the head, right? But preparing to glorify God together, preparing to grow closer to God together, no matter what, then that kind of clears up a lot of the maybe messiness or personalities or money thing, a lot of the extraneous stuff. Not that it's just completely extraneous, like it doesn't matter, but if you focus on marriage as a covenant relationship with God at the head, and every day striving to glorify God alongside that person and help that person, your spouse, glorify God, then that really helps things go a lot smoother.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. So any
Well,
final thoughts?
yeah, take some time, really pray about this. Write down on a sheet of paper what exactly are my motives. Physical attraction is typically going to be the very first thing that even catches our eye towards a person, unless somebody says, hey, I want to set you up with this person. The physical attraction is a real thing. Chemistry, connection, all of that's real, not to be taken lightly. And it's not the whole picture. So some guys say, if she's not a 9 or a 10, I'm not even going to talk to her. Well, you're missing out on some really godly women, faithful women. And the same could be true with a woman towards a man. So, if he's not making 6 figures, then I'm not even going to talk to him. Or if he doesn't have this or that, then I'm not going to. Okay, be careful, right? So the standards that we make, be careful with that. But write out, what are my reasons? The biggest thing to do is to pray. Then think about, what kind of wife or what kind of husband do you want to be? Start acting like that today. Well, I want to be kind. I want to be considerate. I want to encourage. Are you speaking words of encouragement in general to people? Are you actually submitting to the Lord, right? I would also say, thinking about, the choices we make now and how they impact us 10 years from now, that's important in a marriage too, especially for the man. There's a lot of pressure for the man becoming head of the house. That responsibility comes back to you and I, Mouse, with our families, and we're not going to be perfect, but we think about those things. So I don't want it to be doom and gloom, and I also don't want to just kind of gloss over this. And there's a lot of beautiful marriages in our church and other churches, because people have walked by faith and people have trusted the Lord. So don't allow social media or the world to dictate how you make this very important decision. Listen to what God has to say.
Amen. Well, that's all we have for this episode of the After the Amen podcast. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions or want to reach out to us, we'd love to study the Bible with you. You can go to westmaincoc.com and find the sermon and watch the full sermon there, or contact us that way. Thank you all for being here, and we'll be back for another episode next week. And so, goodbye and God bless.